It's time to join Montana's very own and your voice for agriculture, Talkin' Ag Lane Nordlund, for today's Lanecast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lanecast Ag Podcast. And as we look to wrapping up 2024, farmers and ranchers are focused on what is in store for 2025. The winter wheat crop up in Montana is looking pretty good. Calf prices still strong, but what weather impacts will be influencing our buying decisions, our selling decisions, and so much more. Joining us here today is Brian Bledsoe, meteorologist, agricultural meteorologist, I call you. Is that your correct title, or do I just make that up for you?
You can make that up for me, Lane. That's okay. I'm not going to take offense to that. That's what I love doing. So.
Well, Brian, thanks for joining us here again. Several months back, you sat down with us at the conclusion of the Montana Stock Growers mid-year meeting over in Miles City, Montana. And the big message that most of the people that attended the event and then watched our interview and our reports afterwards, they're like, we need to buy some hay. And my father-in-law, about a month, 2 months after our conversation, he watched our video podcast and goes, your guy was right.
Well,
on the forecast for the summer and whatnot. And obviously we don't know, I mean, we've been a pretty open winter so far in Montana, but before we get into that, what's it like coming up here, joining the Montana Stock Growers again and sharing your thoughts on 2025 weather?
It's a pleasure. I love working with the stock growers. I love being able to sit down with you and going on the podcast and talking. Bottom line, it's a really good vibe with just good people who are thirsty for information, and not just information, Lane, just information that they can prove to be actionable, that they can utilize. And that's really what my goal is about. And I love doing it, so it's good to get up here to Montana.
Well, I know when you spoke in Miles City, it got people's attention, and obviously we are seeing these prices continue to stay elevated. I don't even want to mention what I got for some heifers the other day that didn't breed up, but as we look at that, hay reserves are top of mind right now too. Yeah. Maybe we can jump into that later. But what are some of these short-term predictions that you're looking at as we move through December into January? Because you remember last January, that first week of last year, it was 50 below up here in Montana. We thought it was going to get pretty brutal.
Yes.
Well, then it was a pretty open winter after that.
Yeah.
What are we looking at here the first part of 2025?
Well, first of all, a lot of the state is dealing with dryness or drought right now. And some of that is legacy drought, especially in the southwest part of the state. So I think the main thing that we have to focus on is that really what is this dryness and drought situation going to do? Is it going to linger? Is it going to get better? And is it going to get better now? I think a lot of folks are looking at what they're having to deal with currently, and we haven't had a whole lot of cold weather. We haven't had a whole lot of snow in a large part of the state. Is that pattern going to pivot? And I think it's actually going to. There are some things taking place in the Pacific Ocean right now that I think are going to make it more conducive to not only us eventually getting colder, especially in January, okay, and also wetter than what we've seen around here. And I think that those are some things that I was trying to hit on back in May. You know, we didn't have really much of a winter last year, but there are going to be some times this winter where I think we're going to have to buckle up a little bit.
Now, obviously, La Niña was the big conversation.
Yep.
From our past conversation to now, how has that La Niña played out in your view as you've watched these weather events develop since then?
Yeah, so we kind of put things on pause after October. So really from October to November, we actually saw conditions weaken to where we were barely on the threshold of La Niña activity. And during the past couple of weeks, we have started to see it actually intensify again. And I think that's kind of what we're going to continue to see, at least over the next month or so. This event is going to be weak. It's not going to be a moderate or strong event, which is key. And it's also going to be transient, meaning I don't think this is going to last really beyond, say, February, I think at the longest. So while that La Niña is here, even in a weak state, I think it is going to act to enhance our wintry pattern here across Montana, but also much of the northern Rockies, the Pacific Northwest, and just kind of keep that northwest sector of the country pretty active over the next couple of months or so.
And as you've shared with us, and when we take in your weather alerts that Sylvia sponsors through the Montana Stock Growers as well, obviously La Niña, traditionally we see a little more weather, as you mentioned, up here in the northern tier states, and more drier conditions, kind of in the middle part in the southern states.
Right.
Obviously we have folks watching this outside of Montana as well. What guess what are your thoughts when we look maybe Wyoming and south or Colorado and south?
Well, the farther south you go, and I really hit on this a lot with the clients that I talked to, was the pattern from Halloween through Veterans Day was so critical to those the western southern plains, because most of that area didn't have any subsoil moisture at all. And all we did was shove between about 4 and 10 inches of water in the ground during that period of time. And it did a lot of curing as far as the dryness was concerned, the building drought, and also the subsoil pattern. The problem is that we're never very far away from drought in that part of the country. So it's great that the subsoil moisture is there. It's great that the winter wheat crop in that part of the world might not have been this good really at any time over the past 10 years or so. It's given a lot of folks some optimism just simply because they have some water to deal with. But as we go through winter and spring, this is not a favorable pattern to keep that going. That was a little blip in the radar, so to speak. The favorable pattern that we would really like to see is these storms continuing to come through, and I don't see that happening. I think we're going to kind of go back to the drier side of things and kind of stay there in that part of the country. So I think that's important to note, that I got that question a lot. Is this foreshadowing for what this winter is going to be in that part of the world? And in one answer, it was no.
Yeah. And obviously, when we start thinking about calving, there's guys that start calving in January, February.
Right.
If you're registered, I understand that. Other guys, they just want those big calves to sell in the fall. We're a little later on in the spring. Well, what are some things people should be watching, or maybe you're paying attention to in some of these key areas out in the ocean that may be bringing in some different weather?
I think we need to be prepared, and this is especially true for Montana. The thing that has been most notable for the past, say, 4 weeks has been the building of the snowpack in Siberia and in Canada. Those areas are covered up right now. That is a very significant source for Arctic and cold air as we get deeper into the winter. So there have been times in past years where that hasn't been the case so far. So that indication alone tells me you better prepare for some cold, and some of that cold is going to be significant cold, and you better prepare for some snow. So if you're going to start calving in January and you live in the northern plains and the northern Rockies, you better be prepared for weather that you did not see last year. Yes.
And just driving down here today from Great Falls, that winter wheat has emerged. It looks pretty good out there.
Sure.
A little bit of snow out there right now. And I guess when you're looking at some of these major wheat producing states like Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, what are you seeing on the reports in that part of the country? And obviously wheat prices always come to effect for those wheat farmers themselves, but
Sure.
Cattle like to graze on wheat too.
Oh, I've got guys that have told me, says we haven't been able to graze wheat pasture, in the late fall and through the winter for the past really 5 years, and now they've got stuff out there that the cows are just going to town, on that. So I think for the most part, when you look at, whether it's with just various wheat reports or like you and like myself, we drive around and we see some of these things across the country. Those areas are dealing with some of the best winter wheat conditions that they've seen in a very, very long time. And there is reason for optimism there, obviously, as long as we can keep the price where we'd like it.
Well, talking about prices, corn.
Yeah, I know.
Corn is not a good spot. Corn producers are not loving those prices. Feedlots, on the other hand, enjoy maybe buying some cheaper corn.
Of course.
Obviously, USDA reports aside, what are you hearing from row crop farmers on maybe what they may or may not be planting when it comes to corn?
Well, from a corn standpoint, and this is especially true in the traditional corn belt, back in the I-states, they are still suffering from the rainfall deficits that they've been seeing for the past, say, 3 to 5 years. So while last year they were really, really wet on the front end, and they didn't get a lot of water to finish that crop out, which they probably had all the water that they needed because all we did was have record corn crop. Again, I don't want to say scared. I'm saying I'm concerned that the moisture that they see this winter is going to set them up for potentially a dry summer this summer in those major corn producing states. And I think a lot of folks are looking ahead toward that some areas would say, like, well, this might actually help boost prices a little bit. But when you're looking at input costs, what we're looking at, that are not going anywhere close to being down, and then you have to deal with dryness and drought in the summer of those, that's not a recipe for success anywhere. So I think, and this is something that I'm going to share with with folks tomorrow that there are some things that we need to be very watchful of beyond this winter and spring, and as we head towards summer, if you are interested in the corn market.
Well, and definitely there's a lot of conversations this week about risk management.
Yep.
Whether it's looking at your grazing, looking at the forecast for moisture, looking at the economics of it. Dr. Neville Spear is going to be presenting here this week as well. What are some tips you have for producers there too? I know you provide the reports, the weather alerts, and work with some great insurance providers out there that are helping manage that risk, especially for pasture and rangeland. What are some of these key things that you've really shared here? And it's too late to enroll in PRF. We know that. That surpassed this week. But I guess what are some key things that you've been sharing or learned along the way with these relationships?
I think you really have to have your plans dialed in. I think if you guess, you're going to lose money. And I know that sounds just more like just common sense, but you wouldn't believe the amount of folks that I talk to and say, oh, you can really do that now, or oh, maybe I can tweak this and save money, because as we talked about, with everything costing what it does, if you don't have things really dialed in to what you need to do, it's really easy to lose money right now. Whether you don't sign up for PRF insurance, whether you do, or whether you buy hay early before the price skyrockets, or whether you want to plant a particular strain of winter wheat to maybe combat some dryness or drought conditions. All of these things are tied to the weather. So with my background in various different parts of the country that I talk to, I always try to learn from the folks on what they're doing, and then try to shed some light from a weather standpoint what they could possibly be doing more. So I don't like telling people how to do their business lane. I know that I don't want to do that, but I will talk to anybody that will listen to help to use weather to dial in what they can do and do it better.
Obviously, you look at so many different decades of data and weather patterns. Is there a specific time range that kind of reflects what we're going through right now that comes top of mind, or is it a time of its own?
In my mind, the weather patterns that we have seen really for the past 25 years are very akin to the core of what we saw in the late 40s through the early 60s. And
I remember them well.
Yeah. And you better not say that I remember them well either. I'm not that old. But history is such a good teacher. And a lot of the cycles that we are seeing right now in the Pacific Ocean are very reminiscent of what we saw in the 1950s. So when I talk to folks in Southwest Kansas or the Panhandles or even in the South Texas, and they're like, it doesn't rain like it used to. What's going on? And I walk them through those things that happened back in the 50s. I remember my dad saying how bad the 50s were, and they say, then they start thinking, well, maybe there is something to this, to what you're talking about, and maybe we can use that to better, I guess, plan ahead for what we can do better to where we don't lose. So I think that those are some things that we need to, but I would say the 50s, and this is especially true, central and southern plains, very similar to what we're dealing with.
Well, Brian, I hope folks that attended the event, they're going to get a lot out of it. This is just a glimpse, and you share a lot of updates every single day. What's the best way? Obviously, members of the Montana Stock Growers get the information through email, great informative information. If folks want to learn more about you or follow some of your predictions and your forecasts, where can they go?
Absolutely. So you can always follow me on Twitter. I'll always call it Twitter. People call it X, but it's just at Brian Bledsoe. But I also do a lot of private consulting, different places across the country. If you just want to send me an email, it's just Brian Bledsoe, wx@gmail.com, and just let me know what I can do for you, and we'll get going.
Well, again, Brian Bledsoe joining us here today. A lot of conversations here at the Montana Stock Growers Convention, and all the meetings happening here this fall, looking towards the future of agriculture here in the United States. And we'll have more of our conversations from convention here on the Lanecast Ag Podcast and on all of the Western Ag Network broadcasts along the way as well. So with that, friends, that will do it for today's Lanecast Ag Podcast discussing weather. I'm Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lanecast with Talkin' Ag, Lane Nordlund. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lanecast on your Apple or Android devices. We look forward to joining you next time on the Lanecast.